Hello and welcome to Green Angle, the program that explores the environment we live in, ecological problems we face while proffering sustainable solutions. I am Ugochi Olibo. On the last episode, we started a discussion on genetically modified organisms, and today we'll continue on that subject with focus on identifying these products. We spoke with Gbadebo Rhodes-Vivour to shed more light on this. Thanks for joining us, Gbadebo Rhodes-Vivour. Let's begin. We're talking about GMOs. Many people think GMOs are just food, a problem with food. What are GMOs and what is all the fuss about GMOs?
Well, the main fuss or the main concern is genetically modified foods. Genetic technology and biotechnology can be used for several things. The main concern and the main thrust of this opposition is genetically modified foods, which is what you are going to ingest and which is something that connects everybody, the literate, the illiterate, educated, uneducated. Genetic modification for food happens when people take genes from an organism that's not related and put it into it. So for instance, you can get genes from a pig, they put in a tomato. Most of these modifications are done to increase profits, which is the bottom line of it. They'll say that increase your yield, but there's also a situation where you become dependent because every year you have to go back to this point and buy seed because they claim patent rights of this product. And then there are also other factors such as horizontal gene transfer that's linked to cancers, immune deficiency, and also endocrine disruption that reduces your reproductive capacity, and several other things that have been linked all over the world. We've seen what happened in Burkina Faso recently, where they're banning GMO cotton with the aim of phasing it out by 2018, and because they had a huge failure because the thread of the cotton in Burkina Faso was so short that nobody was buying it. And now farmers have started speaking out, and the farmers talk about how the plants are so toxic. In America, people just have huge farms for one person, and then the disconnect is very rare. But in Africa, every part of the farming process is interlinked. So for instance, a farmer of cotton will take the cotton, take the seed, grind it, get the oil and use it to cook, and then feed the cotton stalk to his animals. Now, when things are toxic, you now start to find that the animals are getting sick, they're dying, and the farmers don't even want to touch it anymore. So these are things that are available for anybody to go and research. I'm not just talking, these are based by facts. And that's why the government is moving to ban it now in Burkina Faso.
So, we've been told that the population of Africa is too much and we need to modify our food to be able to feed Africans. Do you think that is true?
We have been fed these lies so that we believe that, we have to be dependent on these Europeans, these white people come and save us. No, we need to start taking ourselves seriously. We have the land, we have fertility, we have good rains, and we have the human resources, we have the people. So there is no reason why we should continue believing this nonsense. If you actually go and start looking at the ratio of the population of people in Europe to the population of the land, to the size of the landmass that they are sitting on, you will find that Africa is one of the most underpopulated places on earth.
So what do you think is behind this whole thing, this whole interest in GMOs? You don't think it is a sincere purpose, to feed humanity?
GMOs and what we're talking about, the opposition that we're mounting, is tied also to patent claims. What these companies do is they come to your land, they come to your country, and they take the best performing seed that you have naturally. Then they modify it to withstand the chemicals or herbicides that they also produce. So what is that when they spray this thing, everything dies. But when they modify this plant, that one survives it. So on the long run, the organisms in your soil is dying. So now I was speaking to farmers about 4 or 5 months ago, and they say there are all these chemicals that spray. And once you plant rice on there, you want to plant beans the next year, it is not going to grow. It's not going to grow. The soil is a living thing. So if you are constantly inundating it with toxic chemicals, it's going to die. You're going to need more inputs to be able to allow it to survive. And then The soil nutrients will create weak plants. They claim patent rights on these seeds. So that means that every year our farmers have to go to these people to buy seeds. If not, they cannot plant. You find that now we're struggling with our currency. We're struggling because we're not producing anything really. So we have high demand on dollars. Now, by the time you now do this, we'll be paying for these things in dollars. That's another reason for capital flight. That's another stress on our currency. When you can actually invest in our agriculture, you can invest in our research institutions, so we produce what we need in a sustainable way for our own health.
Recently, Nigeria's beans was banned from being exported. Does it mean that when we cultivate GMOs, we might have that problem of not being able to export our food?
It's been banned in Europe, 19 countries, and 6 out of the 8 G8 countries have banned GMO cultivation. So I'm talking about Germany, I'm talking about France, I'm talking about Scotland, I'm talking about Greece, you know, a lot of these countries. And the European Union works as one. So if these countries cannot allow cultivation, you can't bring it in. So we'll be sacrificing our potential exports to Europe, which is where most of our trade and exports go in that part of the world. Another thing to take into consideration is, like I said, we have not invested in our farmers. Extension services are at an all-time low. The reason why farmers will be spending or spraying excess pesticides on beans is because they have not been educated on how to spray these pesticides. So they just spray. These people cannot read, most of them. So before, back in the day, you had extension services, and that's when we had these groundnut pyramids and all that. Huge amounts of extension services, people that go into the farms and say, this is how you do it. You know, they don't need to know how to read and write. You just explain through demonstration and show them the best ways to cultivate. So you minimize the use of pesticides.
What are the risks associated with GMOs ecologically?
The problem with this is something called wind drift of pollen. Because if farmer A plants GMO here and farmer B wants to plant organic here, they cannot coexist. The pollen from here will be pushed by wind to come and fertilize this, and this now becomes GMO. And these companies cannot control the wind. This year in March, I believe, yes, in March, a judge called Justice Eduardo in Mexico banned the growth and testing of GMO corn in Mexico. You know, Mexico is where corn originated from, the corn belt. So they found that when they were doing confined field trials, almost about 8 or 30 miles away, they were finding transgenic corn, which is the pollen had gone to contaminate the natural variety. And they had the evidence, and the judge looked at it and said, listen, what you are doing is contaminating our natural variety. People should be able to have a choice. We are not going to introduce this thing to wipe out all our natural choices, and you cannot control the wind. So that's one aspect of environmental pollution, pollen drift. The other aspect, and which is a lot more subtle, is the contamination of water bodies. Because of all these pesticides and herbicides, when rain falls, these things are not biodegradable. They say they are. Initially, when they came out, they said they were. They put it on the label, and then they were taking court, and it was proved that it's not biodegradable. So they've taken it off their labels. So these things bioaccumulate in nature and stay on the plants. When rain falls, it washes this into the water body. So for instance, in America, several states have sued companies like Syngenta and Monsanto for contamination of their water bodies. But they have organizations that test the water samples consistently. We don't. Who is going to be testing where people are getting water in rural areas? You know, and then these things are then tied to other diseases that happen in the body. We cannot divorce this genetically modified seed from the pesticides, herbicides, and inputs that is going to be used on it. They go together. In fact, that's why these chemicals are made by these companies.
What do I look out for when I walk into a store and I'm trying to buy something? How do I know this is GMO and this is not GMO?
Generally, things imported from America are GMOs. Things that have corn syrup are GMOs. So ketchup, you know, baby food products. If it's coming from America, look for a label that says organic. You know, generally then you're safer. But if generally, they actually call GMOs conventional crops in America. And natural, organic are non-conventional. That's how far they've gone. So generally, things coming from America are GMO. That's just a fact. You're safer eating eating food products that are made in Europe or in other African countries. You have to understand also that everything in our body happens on a molecular level. Cancer happens on a molecular level. Cancer only happens because a cell just starts misbehaving and does not grow the way it's supposed to grow. One cell, and then that expands and expands and expands, and then you have cancer. So you also have to understand that when your food breaks down in your body, it's happening at a molecular level. So that's how all these things come up. And I've spent so much time last year meeting with doctors, meeting with farmers, and the rise in diseases that's happening in this country. I remember growing up, there are very few people that you will hear had cancer. Now you find that you know somebody that knows somebody. Everybody knows somebody that knows somebody. The prevalence of this, it's not just GMOs, our lifestyle, is our exposure to toxicity with car fumes and all that. Also what we eat. Because if you look at America and the prevalence of all these new diseases, it's because they've all started eating junk food as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Gbadebo Rhodes-Vivour. Thanks for your other insights on GMOs and why we should be careful about GMOs. You've been watching Green Angle, and we're still discussing GMOs and why we need to be really careful about what we eat and what we introduce into nature.